Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you so much, DJ, and the whole team. It's so amazing for having me. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that we are gathered on land of the Uncompahgre Band of the Ute Nation, past and present. And as my work is clearly inspired by landscape, I want to make sure that we honor this land and the people who've lived here, communing with our mountains before their forced removal. So thank you for that. All right.
All right. We talk every day.
Yes.
Multiple times a day. And I think we want to just give you guys a little bit of context about our relationship and how it was formed. So Leah and I met in the fall of 2017. I was doing a residency at Anderson Ranch, and Leah...
I was an intern right out of college, young and impressionable.
And I corrupted her. And we met. Leah was also working in the cafe. She was doing a lot of things, and we liked each other immediately. Leah's a little shy at first. I'm not so much, but there was something about Leah and her work that I was immediately drawn to. I think I passed through her studio or something like that, and she's making these tongues out of bronze, and I really liked. Who doesn't like a bronze tongue? And so I think when I was leaving, we were just like, oh, let's keep in touch. And I was having a show, and a few months later, and Leah's like, send me images. Now, I've since gotten much better about that stuff, partially from her, because she's really good at that. And I actually followed up and sent images, and then it started a dialogue. And then when I moved here 2 years later, we just hit the ground running.
Yeah, so we're kind of in constant conversation, and that's why I always ask Nori to moderate these talks, because is very intimately involved with my process, and I appreciate her being a colleague and a mentor as I make work.
Yeah, and we have meltdowns together, so.
Yeah.
Preferably not at the same time.
Yeah.
Never so far.
Yeah. So we kind of wanted to start by first talking about how this work is made, like the process, and then delve deeper into the conceptual framework. So I worked at Anderson Ranch for 5 years when I first moved here, and then in the summer of 2022, I left my role there to pursue my practice full time, which has been such a blessing to be able to do. And kind of right after I left, I went to a residency on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, and I lived alone in an apartment, could literally see down into the canyon. And I had been doing mostly woodworking up until that point, but when I left the ranch, I left access to a wood shop, a metal shop, all of these amazing facilities, and I had to really rethink how I was going to pursue my practice. And I've always liked working with natural materials, and paper came up as this thing that I could do that wouldn't require any equipment. All I need is a blender, some buckets, access to water, and then a tarp on the floor. And so I, packed up my truck, drove to the Grand Canyon, never made paper in my life before, and did a little YouTubing. I just kind of had a sense that this would work for what I wanted to do. And I spent 2 months learning, and I basically only made 2 things that I would ever show to anybody. But since then, in the past 2 years, it's clearly expanded into this visual language that I'm really excited about. So there are 2 kind of styles of working here. What came first was these textured pieces, and I make these, all of these textures come from Grand Canyon, and most of them are captured during that 2-month residency. I would hike through the canyon and then use my cell phone to take hundreds of images of any one given rock, mostly geology or cliff surface, And then I would take those back to the studio, load them into a software, and use a process called photogrammetry to stitch them together into a 3D model. So it was kind of high tech, but also low tech. Like I could just hike just with my cell phone and then capture these textures, could extract this information from the environment without needing to physically alter it, take anything away, put silicone on the rock or anything like that. And I had been doing this process for maybe since 2020 I started this process. But when I was in the Grand Canyon, I mean, it's just so inspirational. You get rocks that are 1.5 billion years old and then everything in between. And the diversity of texture was so inspiring. I'd never seen anything in such a concentrated area. So I don't know, I probably captured like 100 scans while I was doing that residency and then have kind of been slowly working through. So from there, I've got the 3D model. I 3D print a mold. Actually, David has some examples in the back that you were being served delicious food on. And then I make paper and I cast the paper onto those 3D printed molds. And it's kind of this nice way of reconnecting with the rock because my process doesn't involve it like touching it in the interaction. And then by pressing the paper into the molds, I get to have this intimate sensory moment with them where I really experience the rock through my fingertips. So that's kind of like the basis of all of this work. And then the layered pieces came later. We'll get into those more.
But there's a story that you wanted to tell us.
But there is a story that kind of sets the scene for all of this. And the residency at Grand Canyon was transformational for so many reasons. But the biggest lesson that I took away was acknowledging that the rock, the land, is sentient and animate. And I'll kind of describe that awakening. So I got to spend about 14 nights below the rim backpacking. Maybe half of that was on my own. My partner came, my dad came. Got to hike with some of the park's geologists, which was really cool. But I had done like a little bit of backpacking by myself, but not a ton. And if anyone's ever hiked in Grand Canyon, you know that the terrain is pretty challenging, even if you're on the trail, like, rim to river. And I think the deepest spot is like 5,500 feet. So it's a long way to get down there. And then a longer way to get back up. I was stationed on the South Rim. I wanted to do this backpacking trip on the North Rim to a place called Nankoweap Creek. And this is a really special place for a number of reasons. One is that it's an historic trail from rim to river. So people have been taking this route for centuries. And at where the creek meets the river at its confluence, there's a granary. So there's like a ruin where people would store goods, grains and things. And so it has this history of human activity in the place. And I had a little bit of a rough start. It's like a 5-hour drive from the South Rim to the North Rim, which I kind of didn't factor in. And I think I started this hike at like 2 p.m. It was maybe 12 miles, pretty a long way to go alone. And I was feeling like super frustrated with myself that I wasn't on time in some way. And I was in this amazing place and just trying to talk myself down, kind of like, Leah, look where you are, chill out, it's okay, you're here now. But I couldn't shake this feeling of feeling anxious. And I got to my campsite after dark and was like, okay, I'm gonna feel better in the morning. So then the next morning I wake up and I camped maybe 2 miles upstream from the confluence with the Colorado River. And I immediately feel better. Like there's something special to waking up in a place for the first time and seeing it in daylight. And the walls were of this narrow canyon, Nankoweap Creek, were Mauve limestone, which is this texture above us. And I walked really slowly, took my time, and I got this overwhelming sense that the walls were this wrinkly skin of a greater being. And I kept seeing these eyes in the rocks as like little quartzy, crystally inclusions. And I felt this energy kind of welling inside of me, like it was lapping against the shore and my body was the shore of a river or something. And it's taken me a while to be able to put this into words. But in that moment, I knew that the walls were skin, the river was blood, that I was walking through the wrinkles of this giant, and that I was being cradled, and the land was acknowledging my presence. And ever since then, I have known that the rocks, the landscape, is alive and that we have something to exchange. So this show is, at its core, a meditation on the animacy of our landscapes.
That's the best one you've done yet. Which takes us, you talk about the rocks having these eyes, and the title of the show, Upon Closing My Eyes, is very significant. And I think that's the piece. No, that's the piece.
This is the title piece.
That's the title piece.
Yeah, well, so we'll talk through a few different meanings of this title, Upon Closing My Eyes. Quite literally, I made this piece by closing my eyes, outside, looking up at the sun, and then kind of paying attention to all that was swirling behind my lids. And, you know, when I started making work for the show, it had been a while since I had had some of those more intimate experiences out in nature. And honestly, it felt a little bit disconnected. A lot of my pieces have a little story behind them, and if there's anything that sparks your interest, I'm always happy to share. But I came to Nori and I was like, I don't have any more experiences. Like I don't know.
Are tapped out.
I don't know what to say next. And so I was feeling disconnected, and some friends encouraged me. Encouraged me to start a meditation practice, and so I began meditating every morning, which I still do, and started to realize that that is my way of grounding back down, and paying attention to some memories or smaller moments that maybe didn't seem as significant in the time, but still are important. So as I was meditating, I mean, that is like part of it, closing your eyes and meditating and thinking about things. But when I meditate, one way that I get really focused is by actually just paying attention to the visuals that I'm getting, even if it's just like a black dot and like a little swirl. Like that really helps me stay focused, and my mind won't wander if I'm paying attention to those things. But I also remembered this really like quiet moment that I'd had, which is where this piece, After Staring at the Sun, comes from. So last summer I was in Maine at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, which is kind of an equivalent to Anderson Ranch in a remote island in Maine. And Allegheny Meadows, who many of you probably know, who's actually is my studio landlord and friend, and he happened to be teaching while I was also there. And we met this really awesome woman named Claudia Bueno, and she had a pretty significant like meditation grounded practice. And on one of the last nights of this residency that I was doing, Allegheny and Claudia and I had been having dinner together, and Allegheny's like, let's go watch the sunset on the rock. And so we all like run through the forest, moss everywhere. It's like, so beautiful. When we watch the sunset, we're all silent together, which is, I really love that ability to be quiet with friends, but still have this experience. And as we were walking back through the forest after watching the sunset, I was getting all of these sun splotches in my vision. And I kind of remember thinking like, wow, I should pay attention to this. Like this would be a cool thing to translate. But then I put it out of my mind a little bit. When I started meditating, things like this started coming back up. And I would say, you know, at its core, these pieces are about translating these moments of the human visual experience back into the language of the rock. Geology is really cool, and I'm a huge nerd about it for many reasons, but it teaches us about what these landscapes have been previously. Like the Grand Canyon has been underwater as an ocean. It's been sand dunes. It's been like a muddy, marshy landscape, and all of this we know because it's now exposed, and you can see fossils, and you can just, you know, the type of stone reveals this information to us. And that has actually been a very important lesson to me on understanding like our current situation of climate change, and just acknowledging that we are forcing climate change at a faster pace than is natural. However, the landscape changes over time. Like that's just what happens. And so like it's gonna do its thing no matter what we do. And that's been a really helpful perspective for me to hold on to. But, you know, it does have this information, and I wanted to create works that respond and create this exchange of knowledge with the landscape by translating my human experience back into a geological language. So like, for instance, this piece is parhelia, and parhelia is this really cool like cloud with a rainbow in it. And I thought like, whoa, the earth has never seen with eyeballs what a parhelia looks like. And it's this very fleeting thing. So what if I could give it that information in my own way?
Do you feel like the layered pieces is that kind of translation of you building has a meditative process to it where you're thinking on these things as you're making the pieces? Or
Absolutely. These pieces take me a while, and I like that about them, and I also resent that about them. But so yeah, I make all the paper to begin with, and I'll like spend a week or two just making a huge stash of paper in all these different colors, and then I rip them up into small pieces, little strips. And then I think of myself as just like a little geologist. I'm just building up the layers, layer by layer. Sometimes I work on a mold, and so I have a topography to follow. But because it's so slow, I have the opportunity to really like think about what I'm doing in a way that, you know, when I make a cut on the table saw, it's like over in a second, and I can't undo it. And so I build these layer by layer, and I can, over the course of a few weeks or even a few months, sometimes I'll spread out how I work on them. I make a section, and then I have time to respond, which is really a big blessing when making artwork, is like being able to take that time and react to what's in front of me.
Yeah. And you want, I mean, I think your first layer piece is back. Is that the very first one?
That's the very first one. And that's the one that DJ saw in my studio when he came and visited.
It's the key piece.
Yeah.
There's always one.
Yeah, and I actually started that one at my residency at the Grand Canyon. And it was like in a really different form, but I had this idea like, oh, it'd be cool if I layered the paper and it would feel like geology. But when I was on a Grand Canyon river trip about a year ago, I had this difficult challenging moment where we were trying to float like 20 miles in a flat water section, but there was like a huge headwind. So we were like rowing, taking shifts every 20 minutes. We'd shift out. It was super frustrating. It was really loud because of the wind going through your ears. And we were getting pretty close, but everyone was exhausted. And if you got out of the current, then you're like 15 minutes behind everybody else. And so it was a struggle. And I looked up and I saw this perfectly level, striated, like velvety cliff line, like dark greens and dark browns and blacks. And then on top of that cliff line, it looked like something had smeared a conglomerate frosting on top. And I remember thinking, like, how can I be frustrated when that exists? Just put everything into perspective. And so I came back from my Grand Canyon river trip thinking about this, and I cut up this piece that I had been working on, and my partner Kyle was so mad at me. He was like, it was gonna be so cool. And I was like, don't worry, I have a vision. And this is the piece that came out of it. And so I added on, and I could reuse chunks, but it's not the color scheme that cliff was, but it's the sentiment of those colors that are in this really magical place. Yeah.
It's important. It's important. Art teaches us about frustration.
Yes, definitely does.
So you have the layered pieces, and some of these newer ones, you're incorporating the wood back in, which I think is very interesting. I remember coming into your studio, and I think you were working on this one, which is, I just love that one. You were working on that one in particular, and I was like, what's happening here? Like, I got really curious. And then you also you started using bronze and wood in these more armature pieces. And I think that all of this work is related, and you can see that, but that has a different feel to it. Like there's something, it feels very futuristic, which I know is part of the intent. I'm not just saying that because it is what we see here, but can you speak a little bit more about that? I think you had a piece at the art base that was kind of the start of this work.
Yeah. I'll just say first, like the layered works are done totally by hand, no digital intervention at all. These pieces have a lot of digitally fabricated elements and intervention. And I think that kind of works with the concepts behind each of them. So last summer I had a solo show at the Art Base in Basalt, and I began making works in this style. I ended up reusing some of the parts for this installation. And I had been thinking a lot about infrastructure like dams. I mean, like when you float the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, you can't help but think about the dam release, like how much water is coming out at any given time. I read The Emerald Mile, which is a really great book all about the history of that dam being built. And like, it was just wild to me, like all the effort that humans go through to restrict these forces of nature. And then like, I mean, it was close to overflowing. Like it almost overflowed and like totally failed. And then they had to put plywood up to extend the reservoir level by 8 feet. And then it almost overflowed again. Like I don't know, we just jumped through these hoops, and that seemed so crazy to me. And obviously I don't have a solution, but I think that's what art is about, is trying to think, problem solve, conceptualize. So that was in my head. Why does the infrastructure restrict rather than work harmoniously with natural infrastructure? And I was also thinking about how my relationship to my work in the studio and craft really mimics my relationship to how I move through the landscape. It's one of problem solving, it's one of patience, it can be one of frustration. And so it's like, I was thinking of my hand as the stand-in for industrial infrastructure. And I wanted to create these pieces of handmade armature. So these are all bent laminated wood finished with graphite so that they have a metallic look. And create my own visual language that would kind of stand in for what societal infrastructure is. But then I wanted to marry that back with the natural textures that I've been capturing. And so this style of work emerged and then has evolved since. I designed these 3D printed joints. So it's like a ball and socket. I'm really proud of them. I can.
You should be. They're amazing.
I can 3D print them in one piece, so I don't have to like bend the plastic to put the ball in. And I can then I have these parts and I can just play. Like I just came into the space and I just made this installation very organically using these 3 digitally fabricated elements. And I love working at this scale, but it's not totally realistic. Like I need a venue to make these works. So after my show last summer, I thought, okay, I need to figure out some way of creating these pieces, but smaller. And I liked the idea of working at kind of a model or maquette scale because I think of a model and architectural framework as the first iteration towards realizing something that will become big and significant. And so by putting my energy into these models, they call them future landscapes, I'm instilling hope that someday utopias like this could exist where the landscape lives harmoniously with us. And so I cast these little pieces out of bronze and again had a ton of fun like playing around. They're also all modular. So I really got to kind of explore with them and then sew the paper on to kind of bring back that handmade element into it to let you know that like, yes, this is infrastructure, but also someone made it. It was made by hand. And yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say.
But you do have a future, looking to the future. Leah has a outdoor sculpture. You got a commission with the Carbondale Arts, correct?
Yeah, so I'll be making a public piece in Carbondale. If anyone has driven through and seen the murals when you drive into town, their Carbondale Arts commissioned 5 murals and 3 sculptures to basically beautify a mini storage spot, which is, I mean, great that they're supporting artists through doing that. So I'll be making a sculpture in this same sort of style, but instead of wood, it will actually be steel. Instead of paper, it'll be cast bronze. And I think it's a really beautiful transition from like, I had been making these models and like working on these, and then I got this commission, and so it's like, okay, now it's actually happening, like coming to fruition, and maybe someday it will be even bigger.
Oh, it will be.
Sure. At least as big as James Searles.
Hopefully.
That would be cool. Yeah, I think that was everything we wanted to talk about pretty much.
I think so. I guess maybe you just want to share one more project that I have percolating.
Right.
You know, I'm super grateful for this opportunity to show all this work here. And I think as I've been making it, I've been thinking about like a lot of it, you know, it's on the wall, they're sculptures. And I want to connect as well to like a different side of my art making personality or background. And in college I did like a bit of performance art, and so I've been thinking about how I can start integrating performance and community more into these works. So I have this idea for a set of costumes, essentially, kind of in this style, where I transform people into rocks, and then we do a video or photo shoot, or they walk down through downtown Aspen, and I create these rock people that like bring back that animacy element and just maybe help people kind of see the rocks alive in this way that's more familiar. So I'm gonna work on those for a show in Flagstaff in the fall, and then hopefully I'll get back on the backside of Ajax and do something up there one of these days. But yeah, I'm really excited about that idea.
And I'll just finish the talk just by saying, once again, how honored we are to show your work. It's so special.
Thank you.
It's really beautiful and powerful. And keep going.
I will.
And thank you guys all.